Today is June 7, Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform continues its operation. My name is Vasil Samakhvalov and we start our following briefing. Our guest today is Andriy Demchenko, the Speaker of the State Bodyguard Service of Ukraine. So Mr. Andriy, the first question is obvious. What's going on in Ukrainian-Russian border? I'm curious about the borders with Kursk, Bryansk and Belgorod regions. What does the State Bodyguard Service observe there? Good afternoon, everybody. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes. Well, as to the border with the aggressor country. In Chernihiv, Sumy and Kharkiv regions, in the directions where the enemy was pushed beyond the state border in the deoccupied territories, the situation remains quite complicated. At the same time, the defense forces of Ukraine, the State Bodyguard Service units, National Guard units and Armed Forces of Ukraine units reinforce that direction to the maximum extent in order to prevent the repeated invasion and any provocations that the enemy can commit. The situation remains difficult because Russia does not end their terroristic activities there on a daily basis. The borders of the deoccupied areas and along the border are being shelled from the territory of the aggressor country. Within May, there were more than 550 shellings of those territories in total, and since the beginning of the month, the mobile teams documented more than 300 shellings, which demonstrates the fact that Russia reinforces their terror. For example, in April, we documented about 450 shellings by Russia in those areas. The enemy mostly uses artillery, mortar fire, and other fire means. At the same time, they continue using aviation to inflict strikes on Ukrainian territory. The enemy actively uses UAVs for the reconnaissance of the areas of Ukraine along the border to identify the positions of the defense forces units, and our State Bodyguard Service teams take all necessary steps and all possible steps to prevent such activities, to prevent the activities of UAVs and not to allow for any reconnaissance for them. Our units also document the use of electronic warfare means to complicate the work of defense forces of Ukraine. Now, what about the border with Belarus? There was a director of the service fired recently, so there are some trainings going on there. So what's actually going on? What do we observe? No matter what Belarus is doing, no matter their attempts of information influence on Ukraine, the situation in that direction is under full control. The formation of any troop that could be deployed in Belarus for repeated invasion of Ukraine is not being observed. Russian military which stay in Belarus are mostly engaged in training or exercises of the troops in Belarus, and according to our information, the number of such military does not exceed 1,000. It's way less than it used to be even in the beginning of this year, when the number of Russian military was reaching 10 or 11,000 servicemen. Then their number was reduced to about 2,000. That was the fact that I mentioned earlier, and now we see the troop to decrease down to 1,000, but we may assume that Russia may move yet more troops to Belarus, but as a rule they will be likely engaged in training and exercises, because Russia uses Belarus as a platform for training of its forces, and Belarus unfortunately supports Russia in its war against Ukraine by providing their infrastructure, their territory, their airspace. However, no matter what happens in Belarus is being monitored by the intelligence of Ukraine, including the units of the State Bodyguard Service, to document all the activities and to what extent it may pose threat to Ukraine. But regardless anything, Ukraine continues to reinforce the borderline, our border in that area, so that our servicemen could be capable of necessary response in case of any repeated invasion or attempts of such invasion. As to the safe area of the border, now that the curriculum year is almost over, there was a forecast of intensification of the passenger flow on the border, because many people were saying our children may be leaving. Some were saying that after the end of curriculum year, the Ukrainians are going to leave Ukraine. So what is the situation over there? And another question, there was information in Telegram channels that there will be a restriction for the 17-year-old boys to leave Ukraine. To what extent is it true? Well, usually winter and summer are touristic seasons, and we were feeling it very good before the full-scale invasion. During those periods, the passenger flow was intensified, and probably in summer we will see such increase as well. But for the time being, there is no some drastic or gradual intensification of the passenger flow. Generally, the average number of the people crossing the border in both directions amounts to 85,000 during weekdays, and during weekends such number may reach 100,000 people in both directions. But there is no prevalence for either people leaving or entering Ukraine, so it fluctuates like 50-50. Within 5 years of this month, the State Bodyguard Service processed about 13,000 people in their border checkposts, including about 11 million people, citizens of Ukraine. And since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, such number is about 42 million people. In April and May this year, the passenger flow was almost equal. It amounted to 2.8 billion people on each month. Before the Easter holidays in April, we were observing the prevalence of citizens of Ukraine entering the country over those leaving. And in May, the relation was about 50-50. So after the end of Easter holidays, we did not document any massive outflow of the Ukrainian citizens outside the country. The most intense passenger flow was documented in the border with Poland. It accounts for about 50% of the total passenger flow. Once again, I want to remind you that the border checkposts are shut down in the borders with Belarus, Russia, and Transnistria sector of border with Moldova. And the border can be crossed in Moldova and countries beyond Transnistria sector and other countries of European Union. As to the information regarding the restrictions for the 17-year-old boys, this information is not true. Only the citizens of Ukraine of male gender aged 18 years and higher are restricted for leaving the country, but all those under this age are allowed to cross the border without any limitations. The State Bodyguard Service is being regulated by the legislation in effect, and during the martial law there is a broad range of exclusions to the men who can leave the territory of Ukraine. All those standards are stipulated by the rules of the border crossing approved by the resolution number 52 of the government of Ukraine, of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine. So please get familiarized with it. And in case a man does not comply with these exclusions or exemptions, the State Border Guard Service will be forced to refuse crossing of the border, which is happening on a regular basis. On a daily basis, the State Border Guard Service personnel refuses about 150 persons on a daily basis and against crossing the border. Let's listen to the questions from the floor. Mr. Andriy, Maria Shinkarenko, Ukrinform, can you please describe the situation in the Belgorod region of the Russian Federation? I mean, the activities of the Legion of Freedom. And as a State Border Guard Service, do you allow some expansion of the geography of the battles between Legion of Freedom and regular armed forces of Russian Federation in Bryansk and Belgorod regions? Thank you for this question, but it's not in the competence of the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine. But again, what's happening in Russia is the dissatisfaction of the Russian population with the political situation inside Russian Federation. So this is the way the citizens of Russian Federation express their dissatisfaction with the political government of this country. Thank you very much. Another question, I think, within the framework of your competence. What are the main risks originating from Belarus for Ukraine for the time being? Currently, as I mentioned, there are no specific risks from that area. I hope that the citizens of Ukraine of Belarus do not want to get engaged in the war with Ukraine. They don't want to get engaged in the full-scale war initiated by Russia. Even regardless that Russian political government is pressing on the government of Belarus, but the Belarusians, they understand the risks that they're facing in Ukraine. However, we're seeing accusations coming from Belarus, including from Lukashenko, that Ukraine should have been captured way before when it was possible. So the political government of Belarus unfortunately continues to support Ukraine, dancing at their horns, but the State Border Guard Service let them understand multiple times what awaits for the troops of Belarus should they dare to enter the territory of Ukraine. Even their weird psyops that they try to exercise in the border of Ukraine, it's not something that would help them. Thank you very much. Another question. Recently, the head of the minister of the Foreign Affairs mentioned that there will be a mechanism developed for bringing people to liability. So can you please tell us how the State Border Guard Service is going, or what role is the State Border Guard Service going to play, whether this process has already started? But what persons are we actually talking about? I apologize. Is the persons who left the territory of Ukraine, who left using the Shlag system, and they have not come back within the terms stipulated by the government. Well, as soon as such amendments to the legislation with regard to the persons who violated the procedure for leaving Ukraine will be developed or adopted, and they will be directly related to the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine, I will be able to give you the answer right away. For the time being, the people who try to cross the border in the illegal manner are being brought to administrative liability. Besides, if such person tries to use the counterfeit documents or that there is other way that they try to cross the border in illegal manner. There is criminal liability used to such people. And I will proceed to another topic, the Schlag system that you mentioned. We document the violations of the terms of staying abroad quite frequently by the people using this Schlag system. So for the time being, if we identify such cases, we inform the administrators of such system. It's transportation security inspection, regional administrations, and Ministry of Infrastructure. So we communicate that information to them so that such person is not provided any more permits to cross the border. And also there are other violations identified using Schlag system, because what we observe, the businesses which are allowed to exercise their activities related to international transportation, who can add the information about their drivers to the Schlag system, they abuse it, and it's been abused by the private entrepreneurs, unlike the bigger companies who care about their reputation. And those inspections that we already exercised in cooperation with other law enforcement agencies, they demonstrate that such companies, by adding people to the Schlag system, they also receive money for that in amount from $3,000 to $7,000 United States dollars. So according to my information, about 40 licenses which were allowed to add people to the, or add any information to the Schlag system, they were prevented from adding such information anymore. And there, for what I know, there are criminal cases initiated in their regard, and there were notes of suspicion served to them according to the Article 332, illegal transferring of persons beyond the border of Ukraine. So talking about Schlag system, do we know the numbers, the number of such abuses? Can it be measured in numbers? And what are the other ways, what are the other loopholes that are popular for the people who may try to cross the border in an illegal way? The analysis by our State Border Guard Service as to the abuse of the Schlag system, specifically by the businesses, it's those people who were allowed to leave Ukraine in January and February using Schlag system. They did not come back from outside Ukraine within the stipulated period, and this number is about 1.5% out of the total number of those who left. This is why in the end of the previous year and in this year too, since we observed these abuses, these violations that people tried to use with the help of the Schlag system, we intensified the inspection of the people. So it should be not only the information in the Schlag system, but it should also be some evidence of activities outside Ukraine. It's the inspection of every specific person, whether their travel is in compliance with the requirements for living in Ukraine, and if our inspectors observe some abuses, for example, when people don't know where they're going, which is weird already, or if the driver is on the system but such person has no driver's license, they are being refused to cross the state border. And since the beginning of Ukraine, we refused about 4,300 such people from crossing the border. They were going as a drivers from those businesses, but they were not able to cross the border due to such violations. As to other loopholes, there are attempts of border crossing in the green area, which means beyond the checkpoints. So in that area, our mobile teams detained more than 12,600 people, mostly in the border with Romania and Moldova. And as I mentioned before, people try to use counterfeit documents to cross the border, and in the check post, the State Border Guard Service detained about 5,800 of such people. Such people were then handed over to the law enforcement agencies, and they are about to be brought to criminal liability. The most of such violations were documented in the border with Poland. Thank you very much. Joining us was Andriy Demchenko, the spokesperson of the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine. We will have our next briefing in about 40 minutes. Joining us in this studio will be Natalia Sad, the spokesperson for the State Defense and Security Concern, Obronprom. See you shortly.